Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome to the HPE Discover 2020 update with PDS. My name is Tamara Corbell. I am the Executive Director of Enterprise Solutions at PDS. We are pleased to be a platinum partner of HPE and co-sponsoring this event. Our goal today is to showcase the HPE Virtual Discover Conference and provide a streamlined technical update to continue your education of HPE products and services. I would like to introduce Bob Powell, Principal Solution Architect at PDS. Bob is an expert of HPE and has made a career of assisting businesses to solve complex problems. Bob will be presenting the HPE overview today. At this time, during the presentation, the live event Q&A feature in Teams is open to post questions. Bob, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Tamara. And I think Stephen's going to do a little swap. Okay, I think there we go. Good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Powell. Thanks, Tamara, for the introduction. I am a principal solution architect here at PDS, one of a few of us. And I focus on an area that we call business data and data protection, which really is about all things that touch data, manipulate data, store data, move data, keep an eye on data, all those important things in the data center world. So I'm coming to you live from my home office in St. Paul, Minnesota, just a stone's throw away from our offices in Bloomington, here in the Twin Cities. I've been around the PDS family since around 2012. A lot of things have changed since then. If I think about some of the enabling technologies that come along, they're all manifested in the products and technologies and solutions that are out there today. Some of the things that really didn't exist back in 2012 or were still kind of emerging was SSD, especially for enterprise. Think about how that has changed the world. Really some interesting things that have gone on. My background as an electrical engineer kind of makes me want to get under the hood and look at things. So I have fun kind of traversing this landscape. I started my journey back when HPUX and Solaris and AIX were all the rage, or becoming the rage. The Unix wars, as we speak of, it was the arguments of System 5 versus Berkeley and all those interesting things that today probably hardly make a difference, but it sure did back then. So the path from there to here has been sort of this continuous learning journey, as I'm sure many of you have been on as well. It's fun. It's an opportunity to kind of get ahead of the technology curve in some cases, sometimes be ahead of that peak of inflated expectations, so to speak, meaning we're trying to head off all of that hype before it becomes dissatisfaction as we iron out technologies. So it's really a fun journey. I've been to the Discover event many times throughout its history, and that even goes back to times when it wasn't called HPE Discover. It was basically a users group, and I was trying to recall what the name of that was, and I'm sure some of you will recall that. But it's really been a fun experience and continues to be that way. So what I'm going to be talking to you today about is the HP Virtual Discover. And the Virtual Discover was really a brand new format. It began back in June on the 23rd, and normally it's an event that lasts a few days, and then you find some things on the web afterwards. Well, this has really been more of a continuous journey. There are still Discover sessions that are being aired in the coming days and weeks. And so all of it is still available and live, and you can still register for it. I checked the link just yesterday afternoon, and so I've posted those links in case anybody wants to go out and learn a little bit more about what HPE has been announcing or talking about in the last weeks or so. The other thing that's interesting is Aruba Digital, or the ATM Digital. They usually had this big atmosphere conference where they did something similar to HPE Discover and really showcased a lot of their technologies and some really nice technical sessions. Well, that went digital this year, and some of that is woven into Discover as well. I'll be talking about some of the Aruba things later on in the discussion this morning, or this afternoon rather. So you can still go out and find things there, and that's why I posted that link. So have at it. Some of the things, there were good keynotes. both by Antonio Neri and by some of his key executives. His CFO gave a pretty good discussion, the CFO of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, pretty good discussion about how to maybe re-architect financially your IT estate. I'm not going to go into all the details of all these presentations. They're on demand and available if you wish to go out and take part. And you get some downtime. It's nice maybe just to jump in on some of these things. But it was interesting to see some of the outside the HPE box performance under pressure. So Lewis Hamilton and Simone, the gymnast, I'm forgetting her last name right now, but anyway, they were interviewed about some of the journeys they've been on their performance under pressure. And the women leaders in technology, that was really focused on 4 HPE women leaders, and it was moderated by Soledad O'Brien, and that was a pretty interesting session as well. So, you know, these are great things to go out and maybe, you know, kind of get a feel for what the industry is saying, and interesting to be able to go back and watch them on demand. That's kind of a nice setup this year. So what I typically went to Discover for was a lot of the sessions that they had, and there were no shortage of sessions this year. 230 of them were available, and lots of categories to choose from. What was really nice is many of them didn't require a big investment in time to be able to absorb the message. You know, some of them were as short as 15 minutes. There were some pretty good lab opportunities, and some of those are still available as well as technology demonstrations. So these are kind of under the hood demonstrations of how things work. And for people that are already incorporating some of these technologies, maybe it gives them an idea about how to consume them better or make them you know, more suitable or better tuned for their environment. And as always, they had courses and things that you could attend for certifications. We would typically use those in some of the free testing to kind of amp up our learning and training, and of course map to some of the ongoing education requirements that HPE places on the partners, like PDS. You know, as a platinum partner, we have some pretty, I wouldn't say strict, they're good, they're very good learning, continuous learning kinds of requirements, and it keeps us really on our toes in terms of how these new technologies roll out. So the themes within Discover, there was a lot to take in, and there's no way I can cover 230 sessions. That would not even be smart. So what I tried to do is boil this down into some of the common themes that HPE was rolling topics under. And so I kind of zeroed in on 4, partly because of time and partly because they were the ones that were emphasized during the conference. So Green Lake is certainly an area that's expanding. Green Lake is the pay-per-use model. I've got a little discussion point on that. A brand new topic, HPE Ezmeral. Ezmeral is a new brand, a sub-brand within HPE around software. Think Kubernetes. And we'll talk more about that. Some new things with HPE storage, especially around cloud, and HPE and Aruba, and some back-to-work solutions that are really kind of creative. And because of some new use cases, are leveraging existing technology in a way that people probably hadn't dreamed up of before. Very, very cool applications, though. So we'll move into a quick section on HPE Green Lake. So one of the things that I picked up on when Antonio Neri was giving his keynote is he made the comment that HPE is bringing the cloud to you. And what that really does is it kind of emphasizes what HPE Green Lake is. It's not really a product, it's really a model of how you pay for things. It's a subscription-based model for consuming the technology that you wish to use on premises, in your data center, in your colo, at your edge, where it makes sense. The interesting part is the way Green Lake works is everything is pay per use, and it's based on how you use it. It's metered usage, just like a cloud experience would be, with monthly billing and all that kind of stuff. It's administered and monitored and all that kind of stuff through something called an HPE Green Lake Central portal. And this is something that has evolved and become kind of the enabling ingredient for these services to be procured and managed and all those kinds of things. So it's the resource control, trending, monitoring. If you're running out of resources, it's starting to let you know that more resources might need to be brought on premises, that kind of thing. So very good tool set for that. So Green Lake, one of the big things around HPE's Green Lake announcement is a lot of more better defined offerings that are easier to consume. So think t-shirt sizes for use cases. So use cases that are out there are in the areas of storage, think on-prem block storage or that kind of thing, VDI use cases for virtual machines, compute, data protection. Data protection is an interesting one because there are now some backup to cloud things that I'll talk about. But the idea is that these things can be procured very quickly, deployed to your location where it needs to be, and then paid for and consumed as you use it on a monthly basis. So a completely different model for acquiring and consuming the technology that you use today. Finally, the goal with of Green Lake and expanding the portfolios and the capabilities was really to address the entire data center landscape, the entire data management landscape, all the way from the edge through colos, existing customer data centers, and even leveraging cloud and that kind of resource. So again, self-service, pay-per-use, scale up and down, and you're not messing with those sites. That can be a lights-out colo site, lights-out edge site, where data needs to be collected. Everything is managed by HPE Enterprise and their partners under the Green Lake experience. So if you feel free to contact any of your ADs about that stuff because it's pretty cool. We know how it works and we can get you engaged in that process when and where it makes works, or when and where it makes sense rather. All right, data storage platforms. So data storage has really been, the driving force in many cases behind the data center experience. People trying to manage their data, and HPE has been a very big player in this space for many, many years. So at HPE Discover, there were not any brand new, I would say, storage platform announcements, but really more an embracement and just kind of a follow-on with the technology that's there today. The core products that HPE has are very, very well supported, and they're continually enhanced. And the enhancements that come along come with essentially firmware updates or feature drops, as we call them. One of the very powerful aspects of not only the HPE storage line, but now extended out to servers and the entire kind of landscape is InfoSight. So InfoSight gives you that kind of look and feel for what your data center is up to. All of your devices are phoning home, and it's an analytics backend that is allowing HPE to forecast and trend, to make you aware of firmware updates, or maybe denying on a deny list certain firmware updates that aren't right for your particular scenario. So lots of things that InfoSight can do. And all of the HPE infrastructure is really now enabled for reporting up into InfoSight. So this is something that is available to all HPE customers without any additional licensing. So leverage HPE InfoSight where you can. So, the areas, enough of the InfoSight commercial, I guess. But the areas that are really HPE's primary storage focus and where they have a lot of their intellectual property is Primera, which is mostly the mission critical, all flash, always available, 100% availability follow on to 3PAR with a lot of really simple, nimble type management sprinkled in. So that's Primera. If you haven't heard about that story, we'll be happy to share that with you. Nimble, that has a very, very loyal following, and HPE has been able to expand on some of that Nimble operational insight that they understand with VMware and such, and have been able to deploy a Nimble DHCI kind of footprint that will enable kind of the ease of management and simplicity of HCI, but doing that with more of a traditional server and storage footprint. So a very interesting and in many cases a real compelling kind of solution. We have lots of information on that. Store once, they're not real evolution, well, no revolution with store once, I should say, other than maybe some cloud capabilities, which I'll talk about. But there is a nice new integration between SimpliVity and Store Once. For people that want to back up their SimpliVity environments to a Store Once environment, that integration is now there with the newest releases of firmware. So those are good, new feature drops, shall we say, to take advantage of. And then, the ProLiant Apollo server storage. These are really the media that goes inside servers. And, there's always been kind of, want to get SSDs in there. We want to get NVMe in there. We want to get storage class memory. There's all sorts of make the storage faster, make it cheaper. And this is, for the server market, people are saying, well, why is it so important in the server market? Well, the next slide will probably lead into this. The server market is really becoming the engine for the software-defined storage market. And so it's really important that a lot of this high-speed technology is in the servers themselves, because software-defined storage is really becoming one of the fastest growing segments in the storage industry. When we say software-defined storage, what we mean is we can take industry standard servers with storage built into them, and we can lay down, or in some cases come right from the factory, software that will enable scale-out storage features, whether these are Hadoop storage systems, backup environments, places where you can have, think of content archive solutions. The notion here is that with things being able to be scale out, the life cycle is going to be much easier. We can life cycle out old server nodes, life cycle in new ones. Your data is always going to outlive your storage, your physical storage footprint. So we need to have some sort of life cycle capability. One of the things that HPE really stepped up to is a program where many titles like this are available as kind of an all-in-one solution using HPE, either ProLiant server or Apollo hardware. So they can be deployed or sourced with these titles already preloaded on them, and the server nodes themselves are pre-architected to the specifications of the server storage manufacturer, the storage software manufacturer rather. So very, very tight integration and well thought out. And these kinds of deployments can also be stood up using the Green Lake concept, where this kind of technology can live at the edge in a colo in your data center, and you can pay for it as you use it. So different concept altogether when you start looking at this kind of scale out storage and blend it with a cost model, pay-per-use kind of billing that Green Lake can offer.
So Bob, we do have a question.
Yes.
So the question states, does the software-defined storage replace the transitional SAN?
Replace a traditional SAN?
Mm-hmm.
In many cases it can. If we think about many of the hyperconverged offerings, those are scale-out storage under the hood, and they're operating as a SAN. Many of those are set up with all flash underneath the hood to provide that high level of response time and low latency. Many of the titles that are available, if we think about a SAN, we might think about that being primary storage, but there's a real big use case for secondary storage. And these kinds of things are network-based, they're easy to stand up, not necessarily doing fiber channel protocols like we're used to in a regular traditional type of SAN, but are very much a shared storage environment, just maybe not using block protocols in all cases. I don't know if that answers the question, but there's a lot of use cases for scale out storage.
Thank you, Bob.
So one really interesting HPE intellectual property that also is kind of expanded upon at HPE Discover is HPE Cloud Volumes. And these are used in a couple of different ways. So the original cloud volume concept was, let's have a cloud adjacent piece of hardware, in this case a nimble storage array, that sits up in a data center that is basically a cable pole away from Amazon and Google and Azure. And so let's put that nimble array up there, and let's make it a replication target for our nimble array that is sitting in our local data center. And rather than have every customer have to put their own nimble array up there, let's make it a pay-per-use model so that any nimble customer can go out and procure a volume and put it out there in the cloud and replicate to it. And only replicate the data they need on a volume by volume basis. Snapshots are free, there's no egress charge, all sorts of cool things. And by the way, since it's just a cable pull away, essentially, a software cable pull away from any of those major cloud providers, the data that you replicate to that cloud volume is now easily available and can be accessed from any of those cloud providers. So it's a very interesting way to enable data mobility without being locked into a cloud provider of choice. To expand upon that, what HPE has done is now introduced something that is really a cloud volume backup capability. And so what that allows is, think of it as a virtual store once device that could sit in your environment, a virtual backup target. You don't need to re-architect your backup software. You essentially point it at the new target. And that target happens to point up to some cloud adjacent storage space that could then be recovered either back on-prem or to a cloud volume that you can operate on from any of the cloud providers. So it's an interesting concept. I think there's great use cases that will develop from it. And I think that it's going to enable some data mobility that becomes more difficult when you're trying to move things around and make it available to the cloud. So more to come on that, but it's a very, very cool product that customers can now start taking advantage of on a pay-per-use basis through Green Lake as well. So that's a very powerful aspect. Okay. Ezmeral. So Ezmeral is, if we think about what's going on in the industry today, we start to think, there's been a lot of announcements that for me were a little bit, I was like, okay, well, what does that really mean? And I'm thinking about like IBM acquires Red Hat, and why'd they acquire Linux? They didn't acquire Linux, they acquired OpenShift, which is really Kubernetes at scale. Or an attempt at managed Kubernetes. Same thing with VMware Tanzu. Platform 9 is a managed Kubernetes. So Anthos from Google, that was kind of the original one. So Ezmeral is really a new software brand that is in place to deliver on some of the challenges that customers are facing in the area of containers. Containers, we all understand virtual machines, but containers, at least for me and for a lot of people, it's still a little nebulous. There's lots of layers and nesting of data. It gets a little confusing at first, but what's happening is starting to make sense in the Kubernetes space. So the idea is that containers stand up really fast, but you need to manage how many of those you start, manage the high availability, all that kind of stuff. That's what Kubernetes really does. And then being able to develop and test in a Kubernetes environment, that becomes a challenge as well. Do we stand up individual environments? Well, so the idea is that we need a managed Kubernetes environment that we can use to help modernize apps that can't be rewritten, and that can address what we call stateful and persistent data. In a container, you can stand it up fast, but if it doesn't have anywhere to store its data, that data goes away when it's done. So the idea of having stateful data on the back end has been kind of a challenge. It's become better understood, but it's still one of these very interesting discussions in the container world. The other thing that's really interesting is as you start to scale this up and really put enterprise applications into it, how do you secure it? And so how does that, how do you keep things, I mean, we all know the drill. I mean, security is key these days. So how do you guarantee that you're going to have scale when you start, or security when you start scaling these things? So to solve these solutions, you know, HPE, as you might have heard, acquired a couple of companies. Blue Data is a company that HPE acquired earlier this year, and they've been around for a few years. And they set out to create a managed Kubernetes environment specifically to address some areas around scalability for analytics, AI, machine learning. But the end result was pretty cool in that they came up with a container platform that made it fairly straightforward to encapsulate existing applications without having to tear them down into a microservices architecture that containers require. So kind of a twofold thing there. And that acquisition, or within Blue Data, was called KubeDirector. So there's some interesting things going on there. One thing that, so Blue Data was the big part of the, one big part of the acquisition. So think of that as a multi-tenant way of standing up Kubernetes environments so you can have developers and all sorts of people operating on things. The promise of Kubernetes is your containers can run anywhere, and if you can access the data, that means your applications can run anywhere. So solving that data, persistent data for containers is a really cool thing. So one other thing that HPE acquired, you see down here this Ezmeral Data Fabric. That was a secondary part of the of this whole Ezmeral kind of endeavor, and this is the acquisition of MapR. MapR is essentially a Hadoop file system on steroids that can scale out to just unlimited sizes and capabilities. And that's really important for an analytics world when you're trying to separate the analytics that's done for business intelligence and other kinds of things, to separate that and to you know, be able to scale. So that was a couple of the premises that were out there with Blue Data and then with MapR. So MapR can live anywhere with live within data centers. It can live in the cloud. And what's interesting from a container perspective is that it has a global namespace, meaning wherever that data is, a container can access it. So it's a very interesting marriage of the MapR technology with the container fabric. More to come on that. It can get very complex, but if you're doing anything in the container world, you should really just kind of keep your eyes open to this. The future is the app modernization. Today, what that KubeDirector thing did for you know, for Blue Data was to allow the machine learning ops kinds of things. Those applications that are out there, you might see Spark and Hadoop and things like that. Those are applications that the Blue Data team has already put through this encapsulation framework. It's not really encapsulation. It uses true Kubernetes extensions, kind of a custom controller framework to manage all these things as they're deployed. That same framework is the one that is on track to modernize apps that are already in place without having to take them apart. So that's the idea. Let's try to modernize apps without having to take them apart and turn them into a microservices architecture. Would be much easier to do it that way. So that's the promise. All right, enough about Kubernetes. And we'll move on to, which is this is kind of a cool conversation. So let's see, we're coming up on 30 minutes past the hour. I think we're doing pretty good. So HPE laid out the back to work and the challenges that everyone in the world is facing right now. And they laid it out in, you know, essentially a couple of stages, you know, crisis management, recover, adapt, operate in the new normal, and, you know, trying to navigate between those various stages. So to address those, the two green boxes, a remote work program and a back to work program, were created as a kind of a template for the things that you may wish to be looking into as you support those kinds of endeavors. So the remote work program was really there to address the things that we've all been challenged with remote collaboration, virtual desktops in some cases. How do we make sure everybody's connected? So various programs and things put together, many financial programs too, to assist people with maybe deferring payments or things like that as they're working through these things. One of the interesting things that HPE brought to this particular conversation has to do with the like the visual remote guidance. And so HPE Team Virtual Rooms is a technology that the support organization has been using for many years to help with the support of the equipment that customers have in their data centers. And so they're making this technology available to customers to use for kind of a remote assistance tool, if you will, that may offer some better security or better capabilities and is really more tuned to providing a support experience rather than just trying to start up a Zoom call or something like that. So they're making that tool available. The other things, lots of good technology and things that are available to address the other parts of that framework. Just wanted to highlight that that HPE Rooms thing. That was kind of an interesting use case. As we move on into the back to work phase 2 and creating a safer workplace, all sorts of things come into the conversation, and many of the solutions, whether it's touchless entry or the fever detection or alerting, a lot of those are third-party integrations that HPE has worked with third parties to build, and they can be very customized, but they're not out of the box. And that's okay. They work, they can be very compelling. One that I'd like to highlight, though, and this was a conversation that I think was originated at ATM Digital, the Aruba Atmosphere Digital, was around social distance monitoring and some of the infrastructure needs in that particular area. And so one of the things that they were highlighting is that if you have a deployment of Aruba access points, specifically around the 300s and 500s, you may already have a platform or the infrastructure in place to enable some contact or location tracing. The Aruba 300 and 500 access points have, obviously they're Wi-Fi, but they also have Bluetooth location things built in for Bluetooth asset tracking and things like that. And so there are some tools that HPE has that are enabling some of these technologies in use cases we hadn't thought of before. Excuse me. So from a Wi-Fi perspective, the Aruba APIs are always listening for Wi-Fi devices and connections and things like that. That information, as those connections are made and people move between access points and the distance from them is triangulated, all that information can be now shared with an Aruba Central analytics portal and some analytics processing that will be able to do some record tracking and some historical tracing of where Wi-Fi devices were over a period of time and where they may have been close to other Wi-Fi devices. So you see in kind of the second part of this slide where HR may have to, or maybe they're informed of a potential sick person, there may be information that is already available to you through some of the infrastructure you have that could allow this to happen. Now, the things that are new, those are essentially feature drops that are coming through the Aruba Central Wi-Fi portal. And this Wi-Fi portal can be taken advantage of by any of the Wi-Fi customers, Aruba customers are using this kind of thing. And we can help you figure that out. This is new. I mean, this is like they're developing this stuff. They're, as we speak. But it's a very cool use case that they're leveraging. And this particular new tab is, again, it's a feature drop. Anyone that has the technology installed in their environment will be able to use it. Now, one of the downsides to using Wi-Fi is that its level of accuracy is okay, but it may not be exactly what you need. That's where the Bluetooth can come in. So the Bluetooth infrastructure being built into the Aruba access points can be enabled, and there's kind of a companion technology to this that is under the marketing name called Meridian. And Meridian is an analytics. This kind of technology was used for wayfinding. So think of indoor wayfinding. You're walking around with your cell phone and you've got an indoor map and you're being pointed in the direction you need to go. There's Bluetooth beacons that are figuring out where you're at. They know where to go, and the software programs your course. Well, that was one use case. Well, now that's being expanded to where these kinds of AP or these kinds of beacons can communicate via an AP, and then their location can be very closely triangulated. And it's down to the point of just a meter or two. And with a lot of history, we can start looking at things like, dwell time in an area, how many other people were around. And in some cases, you could use it to say, hey, these are congestion points that we need to eliminate. So the way that this happens is these asset tracking tags, which really are like the little fob on your name badge. These are the things that follow you around. They're easy to support, pretty durable, maintenance free, all that kind of thing. So this is one thing that you would need to enable the better, I guess, the better detailed location finding with Bluetooth. You need something like this to make that work, but not too hard. And then we've got screenshots, and these are things that the Meridian backend software can create and show exactly where people are or have been, and location tracking and all that kind of stuff. Now, the development of the analytics to do the contact and location tracing is ongoing as well, but the guys in the labs are, they've got their hands on the keyboards 24/7, it would seem. The way this is kind of rolling out, the Wi-Fi based, if we look at what, some comparisons to how these things differ, Wi-Fi based, the cost is essentially included. The accuracy is part of the challenge, but it's a way to get started and, maybe use some of the things that are now, we're finding are built into your environment as part of your overall strategy for return to work. There's outputs, as you can see, data exportability, so reports can be created, things like that. And availability, yeah, we're looking at like now, right? July, August, this stuff is hot off the press, so to speak. If you want to look at the Bluetooth based, then we're looking at asset tags and some Meridian licensing, but your accuracy goes way up. And if you already have APs deployed, you've got the foundational technology and infrastructure there that's kind of ready to go. Now again, that's only one aspect of the back to work conversation that people are having. There's all sorts of other things that are out there, and PDS is really involved with a lot of people in this space as well. So we're working real hard to establish some of the other kinds of value we can add with some of the other analytics and other products in this space. It's really it's interesting how many new use cases for existing products have emerged and have been brought forward as a result of some of the challenges we've been having the last few months. Kind of exciting. So kind of finally, for back to work, the future, I think what HPE is predicting, and I guess I kind of have to agree, it's probably going to be hybrid. For us, in the world we live in, or at least my world, it kind of was hybrid, but there were no restrictions on when it had to be hybrid. In the new world, there may be various restrictions on how many people can be certain places, certain times, but we do need to communicate. We need to keep things running. Smart offices, smart buildings, that technology will certainly expand. And so it'll be, as we adapt and adjust, the new normal will be a new look and feel, I'm certain. So that kind of sums it up for my overall thoughts on HPE Discover. I'll be going back to look at a lot of the demos that I didn't have time to look at just because they do a really nice job of putting those out there. But thanks so much for taking the time today. It's a little weird to sit here in my office and stare at my screen and assume I've got a lot of people listening to me, which I guess I do. But yeah, it's been a good experience. Thanks for listening. Tamara, I think you were hoping to have some closing remarks. as we get things wrapped up. And if there are any questions, we're happy to entertain those kinds of things as well. We've got a little bit of time left to work through that.
Very good, Bob. I don't see any questions currently in the live event Q&A. If anyone has any questions, if they could post them and we'll review them. But at this time, I don't see any out there. So thank you, Bob, for providing the exceptional presentation. If you have any questions or want additional information regarding the provided content, please contact your account, PDS account director. I don't see any additional questions, so PDS wants to thank everyone for joining today. And if there are no other questions, we'll just give it a second here. I don't see any coming in.
We could poll people and see what they ordered for lunch.
We could.
And Tamara, just a note for the group here that this has been recorded, and so we'll make sure that those that have registered for the event have the link that they can review or share afterwards.
Yes.
Okay, and I did include on the final slide for you folks those links again. If you would like to access Discover or Aruba Atmosphere Digital, both very good portals for getting some additional information.
It does look like we had a couple questions that came in.
Okay.
Tamara, do you see those?
I do. So how do you send the gift card is the first one from Kathy. So that would be more of a marketing question.
Sure, yeah. We will follow up. We have all of the information of those who registered. If you'd like to send an email to pds@pdsit.net. If you're here and have any question about whether you registered ahead of time or not, just do that, and somebody from the marketing team here will follow up.
Very good. There are a few more questions coming in for Wi-Fi. Let's get back here. Contact tracing is it that only for Wi-Fi models with Bluetooth support, Bob?
Well, so the way the Aruba team described it initially is that so the 300 and 500 already have Bluetooth in them. They did allude to the 200 series being able to play a role in this, but because that doesn't have Bluetooth, it would be Wi-Fi only. So I think that was the message they were trying to get across. But if you would like, we'd be happy to look at your unique situation and coach you on that. That'd be really easy to do. So yeah, happy to do that.
Very good. There is another question that came in. What is the latest with HPE and hyperconverged infrastructure?
Oh, well, hyperconverged infrastructure is, HPE's own intellectual property is really around SimpliVity. And so SimpliVity is the homegrown, well, through acquisition and now enhanced and continuing to gain more and more features and capability. That is really around the SimpliVity software with many more models and nodes and things like that. Now, in parallel to that, obviously we all know that there's VxRail, there's Nutanix, all sorts of other kinds of software-defined environments that hyperconverged kinds of environments. So today, HPE does offer vSAN certified kinds of nodes, and vSAN is the engine underneath VxRail, and so vSAN is certification for Synergy as well as vSAN ready nodes for people that wish to deploy that. And then in the Nutanix space, HPE and Nutanix have come together with the pay-per-use Green Lake model to be able to offer Nutanix on-demand pay-per-use in your data center or your edge, any way you want to consume it, running on HP ProLiant DX platforms. So very easy way to deploy and consume. And then Nutanix also has a relationship to deploy their software using HPE DX platforms. So when I say it's the strategy, I mean the investment around HPE intellectual property continues to be around the SimpliVity enablement and all of the features within that. But obviously, with such excellent hardware, being secure, reliable, well supported, they are able to play a role in other environments as well. And so we can talk to you about those. And that's the case for software-defined storage, which is essentially, in some ways, if you twist the argument a little bit, it's hyper-converged without running workloads on it. It's still scale-out storage, which is what hyper-converged is. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice it. The other hyper-converged strategy I might allude to are the ones called disaggregated, or the ones that have D in front of them. And that's the notion that you get all the automation for deployment and management and life cycling of hyper-converged, but still being able to do that in a traditional server and storage. So think ProLiant DLs and Nimble storage, but having all of the automation and life cycling capability of some of the hyper-converged platforms. So that's a little bit different twist too, but still a part of the hyper-converged strategy. So kind of long-winded, but hopefully that helps. And we can take and have an individual conversation about that too.
I think the only question we have left is kind of a silly one. When do we get out of our basements and back to Vegas? I think that's a hard question to ask. So our answer at this point in time.
Yeah, from the basement to the rooftop, right? We get there.
All
yeah,
right.
I don't know that we'll be there this year, but yeah. I'm quite certain that sometime in the future, we'll be seeing each other there again.
Very good. Well, I think we've answered all the rest of the questions at this point. I don't see any new questions coming in. Give it a moment. And Stephen has provided some information in the chat. You can send your info to PDS at pdsit.net. If you're not sure if you've registered, we'll ensure you receive the gift card. Great. All right. Well, PDS, thanks everyone for joining today. And no other questions are present. So have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.